Hello, everyone. Here we go with a new episode of the Artelize Podcast. I'm super thrilled to have an amazing guest with me today. Welcome, Ruth Hartt.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
It's amazing to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Ruth, you're the Chief of Staff at the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation. And you bring an incredible blend of experiences as a former opera singer. So that's actually a common point. I'm also a former opera singer. Fantastic. But you're also a choral director and music educator. After witnessing the decline of performing arts audiences firsthand, you're on a mission to help arts organizations rethink their strategies using innovation and a customer-centric approach, which we know is fundamental. Your journey from rural Maine, it's a beautiful state, I know, to the opera stage to shaping the future of arts marketing is nothing short of inspiring. So let's dive in.
Yeah, let me just give you a little background on what that journey looked like, because it is sort of a wild ride. So as you said, I spent about almost 2 decades in the performing arts sector. I was a professional opera singer. I was a choral director. I was a music educator, and I was just immersing myself in the joy of performing and of making music. And I didn't really think much about audiences. I just expected them to show up, right? And kind of assumed that they all felt the same passion for opera and classical music and choral music that I did. And if they didn't, well, then they should. But as time went on, I just became more and more worried about the state of arts funding and the number of empty seats that we were seeing. And really, for me personally, the viability of a career in opera. And so about 7 years ago, I made the tough decision to leave that world, in search of a steady paycheck, really, to be frank. And by sheer luck, I landed in the world of Harvard Business School. I found myself in an administrative role at the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation, which is, yes, it's a mouthful, but basically it is a think tank. It's a research organization that was founded by a renowned Harvard Business School professor and one of the world's foremost business thinkers. His name was Clayton Christensen. And his innovation frameworks completely changed the way that I thought about audiences and about how to grow audiences and how to market to audiences, and really made me realize that in the arts sector, we've been doing audience development backwards. Really, the lens has been focused on the wrong thing. And so while I still felt a little bit of concern about the state of the arts, I also started to feel a little bit more hope for the future of our sector, knowing that there were some new strategies to implement that the arts sector really hadn't ever implemented before. And so I kind of say it was my journey from the opera stage to the concert ballroom. So now I sort of bridge those two worlds of business, innovation, and the arts. And my mission really is to help arts organizations rethink that outdated, traditional status quo approach to audience development and start to unlock growth through this new perspective, through this idea of what it means to be customer centric.
But before we dive into the biggest topics of audience retention and audience building, I normally ask the guests of the Artelize podcast to share a little anecdote or fun fact about themselves for the people out there to get to know you better.
Yeah, it's interesting, I think, to have sort of landed in this space. First of all, the space of like the opera world, but also the world of business innovation. As I think you mentioned, I grew up in rural Maine and, definitely blue collar, rural Maine, big family. I have 5 siblings, and it was a fascinating sort of congruence, I think, because
Great.
while I
All
grew up in
girls? Are you all girls?
No, 3 girls, 3 boys, and I'm right smack dab in the middle. But I think what was interesting about this upbringing is that I was in this sort of blue collar rural world, but my parents really valued the arts. They both came from families that very much valued the arts. And so all of us were put into music lessons at a young age. So in my family, I played piano and I sang. We had a flute player, a violinist, a French horn player, a guitar player. And so we had sort of a family orchestra. And so I really I'm so grateful to my parents for providing sort of this incredible way that I was able to sort of broaden my horizons in a way that I think if I hadn't had music, I wouldn't have found myself where I am today. So I think it's another part of my journey that I think I don't talk about a lot, but I think it's sort of a neat piece of it.
That sounds lovely. And probably a very happy childhood, busy fighting with your siblings.
Busy and very loud with all of us practicing in various rooms of the house.
That's where opera singers come from, loud environments, right? Because they need to test that volume thing. So let's dive into audience. The pandemic has basically exacerbated a trend that started before. So after that, it became absolutely obvious that the audience was declining tremendously. I would like you to tell us your insights about why is retention, audience retention, so important? Because everybody seems to know that, but do they really, practically speaking?
I actually talk less about audience retention and more about audience expansion. And the reason is this. Once I got to the Christensen Institute and learned these frameworks, we were using frameworks at the Institute that had really completely transformed industries and transformed the way businesses thought about growing customers and building sustainable organizations. And so immediately, of course, I thought about the arts world and thought, why aren't we using these ideas in the arts world? And so I started digging into the data. It's quite a wake up call when you really look at the hard numbers. The National Endowment for the Arts, in their most recent survey for public participation in the arts in the United States, tells us that between 1982 and 2022, opera audiences, which is, of course, the first discipline I looked at being an opera singer, opera audiences plummeted by 77% over those 40 years. Classical music audiences declined by 65%, so they weren't far behind. Theater audiences have dropped by 62%, and ballet audiences have dropped by 52%. So the numbers are staggering. And when you're in that world and you don't have that data, you don't really realize how far it's declined. Another piece of data is from Colleen Dillenschneider. She works at Impacts Experience, and she's always doing fantastic research and really digging into the numbers. She has found that the negative substitution rate in the performing arts sector is 0.904, which means every time someone leaves the sector, they're only replaced by 0.904 of a person. What that really means is that we have an annual reduction rate of 9.6%, so almost 10% loss every single year in the performing arts. So this is, when we think about this, what this looks like as we extrapolate out, I think a lot of arts leaders don't realize this means we are literally on our way to a tipping point where we have lost another 50% of our audiences. And that tipping point, if we're losing 10% a year, we're going to hit that tipping point in 7 years. I mean, that's like not only in our lifetime, it's like within the next 10 years, right? And so, for me, that says something has to change and really fast, right? Something fundamental has to change. And so that's what really drives my work is I don't want to see my beloved art form disappear, and I know of all the benefits that the arts bring to society. So, what can I do to turn that around? And I often talk about how we are in a dramatically changed world. Technology has completely changed everything, right? I talk about how in my lifetime we had rotary phones, we had encyclopedias, and now we've got everything on a cell phone, right? That's just one sort of tiny, example of how our world has changed. And so, what I often say is a dramatically changed world requires dramatic change. We can't keep doing things the way we used to do them before we became a global digital world. I think if we're going to not only retain audiences, but rebuild and expand our audiences, we have to recognize that our relevance has declined drastically. And if we want to remain viable, we have to reclaim that relevance. And so for me, it comes down to what does it mean to be relevant? And I think a lot of times arts organizations misstep in that area. They think, okay, if we need to be relevant, that means we need to be hip. We need to get on the current trends. We need to stage our operas in the modern day. And oftentimes that's not going to do, little tweaks like that without a fundamental change aren't going to do the trick. And so for me, it comes down to the etymology of the word relevant. And now I think you as an opera singer probably know how important it is to like understand the meaning behind your words, right? Especially if you're singing in a different language, you're trained to really dig in and figure out what does this word actually mean so that I can, portray it accurately on stage. And so of course my opera singer mind went to, okay, what's the etymology of the word relevant? And originally that word actually meant to be helpful. And so I think for arts organizations, we need to think about what does that mean for us, right? What does it mean for art to be helpful? And what I love about that is it ties directly to Clayton Christensen's frameworks around what it means to be customer-centric. So should we dive into that? Should we dive into business innovation and theories and all of that?
Yes, absolutely. I would just want to mention that I was about to ask you. So, how do you think the fact that you were a former opera singer have has impacted or given you superpowers in the way you analyze things? And you explained it beautifully. What is really needed for this industry, the customer-centric approach, it's advocated by a lot of people. You heard David Taylor, you heard Aubrey Bergauer. But can you actually help us understand what concretely this means? How do you really put that into practice professionally?
Yeah, well, let's start by talking about what it means to be product centric, because that's the flip side, and that is what we have done in the arts sector for hundreds of years, right? And to be product centric means to put the focus completely on the product, on the company, and on the producers of the product, right? And to assume that the features of the product itself are what draw people in, right? So people are saying, I need world-class orchestral music in my life. That's what I need, right? The issue with that is, first of all, with the digital world that we're in today, there are so many options for people to choose from at the click of a button and often for free that, there's just so much more competition, right? The other issue is that the world has becoming more and more diverse, so much more diverse than previous generations, right? And these more diverse generations don't have that background in that product. So they're not familiar with it. It's not something they think about as like that fits into their life, right? I think the number is 48% of Americans simply don't feel welcome in the classical music world, right? And so being customer centric really means showing them how relevant our product is to their lives. Clayton Christensen came up with this framework that ties it all together. I think it's sort of the foundation for what it means to be customer centric. And it's this very simple premise. It's that people don't buy products, people buy outcomes. And so, in other words, when someone purchases a product or a service or a concert ticket, they're not just simply buying that thing, they're actually hiring it. They're enlisting it to help them achieve an outcome. So when you think about the arts in that way, it really starts to flip around how you think about how to attract people to your product, right? Instead of thinking about how world-class your art is, or how talented your musicians are, or how much history your organization has in, providing this outcome, this product, you start to think about, okay, what is it about our product that is tangible, that leads to a real outcome in a person's life, right? In their everyday life, that sort of, what's that sweet spot between what we offer and what consumers are needing right now? Often, that comes down to things like, when you look at consumer trends in the world right now, people are looking for a digital detox, right? They're trying to find ways to unplug, check that box, right? Arts organizations are great at that. People are looking to prioritize their wellness, especially since the pandemic. People are looking to improve their mental health, especially with politics and everything and that's going on in the world right now in terms of news. People are looking to find social connection in a world where everything is online, right? So all of a sudden, there's all these incredible benefits that we can start to focus in on in arts marketing and audience development in a way that we never really have before. And I think it's a huge pivot that arts organizations need to be making.
We know for a fact that normally what arts organizations tend to do is to change the programming. I mean, when they want to reach out to a broader, more diverse audience, they think that the key is to cover different genres or maybe crossover them, and that can have an effect to a certain extent, even though I was recently in London at the Business of Opera Summit. And
Hmm.
Mark Skorka actually brought some data from the US and said that audience has changed. And now you have these families that, as you were mentioning, have no background in the classical as we used to see in the past generations. And so actually what they're looking for is nothing different from the original opera experience. So maybe you have arts organization trying to make all these changes exactly in the settings and trying to make things more modern. But actually, what the audience is really looking for is the ultimate operatic experience, which is the most traditional one, because they want something different. You were mentioning also online stuff. It is there for you, it is accessible, but probably lacks a bit of depth. And when you want a real 360-degree experience, obviously, performing arts can give you this. We know that as artists, so you really take the audience somewhere else. They switch off from the reality, but also they find themselves, they find a connection. So, what would be your tips or little suggestions to organization? Because we hear a lot of times saying, hey, you need to talk to your audience. You really need to ask a lot of questions. And this
Yeah.
is something doesn't seem to be a good practice. I've heard very, very few arts organizations who do that and that do that consistently.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because the for-profit sector is doing it all the time. They're absolutely winning that game of doing customer research. I think it's huge numbers. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but a huge numbers of for-profit organizations have departments, called the voice of the customer, where that is literally their job, is to talk to customers every day. And so it's just something that we need to start pulling into our strategy and putting it in the budget, right? I mean, that's the hardest thing, is finding room in the budget for it. But I think it's an investment that has huge ROI. And so, yeah, I actually have a framework, a sort of a roadmap that I've created for arts organizations, and I call it my gold framework. I know it's a little bit corny, but it works. And so it's the first step is gather customer insights. And so really what that's all about is not only sitting down with 10 to 15 customers every 6 months or every 12 months and just like one-on-one hearing their stories. I call them listening sessions, and trying to suss out underneath their talk about the product itself and about the venue and the artists, what is it that they walk away with that they did not have before, right? What is it that they're experiencing in your event that is really changing them, on a cellular level, which we know from the book Your Brain on Art can actually do that. And that's where you start to find those outcomes that they're seeking, and find out what is the outcomes that are drawing people to the arts. Right. And then what I like to do is I like to look at consumer trends, we're looking at research that's been done by global firms like McKinsey and Deloitte, and see what trends are showing up, like what are consumers seeking and what percentage of consumers, in our communities are prioritizing things like wellness or social connection. And that's where you can start to see, okay, this particular outcome is going to be really financially viable for our organization, right? And this particular outcome we can really speak to. We have the resources to really address this particular outcome. So then the next step is to optimize your value proposition. And that's all about stepping away from a value proposition that focuses on your product and optimize your value proposition around the outcomes that your customers are finding at your organization. So that changes everything. That changes your messaging, your branding. It changes your homepage, right? There's these questions that you need to answer for the customer that a lot of arts organizations are not answering. Like, what problem are you solving for me, right? This is what customers are, when they're deciding whether they're going to actually engage with you, they want to know, like, are you going to solve a problem in my life? What outcome are you going to provide for me, right? And what proof do you have that you can actually deliver on those promises? So there's a lot to that value proposition, I think, that needs to be shifted for a lot of arts organizations. And the next step is the L in GOLD framework. So L is for leverage the customer journey. And that's all about avoiding the mistake that we make often in the arts, that everyone is an insider. So oftentimes our marketing speaks only to those insiders who know and love our art form. And so it's about expanding the way that you reach out to audiences and acknowledging that, yes, we do have insiders, but there's all these other customers on this continuum from completely unaware of us and our art form, all the way through to the insiders. And so you've got to really diversify your approach. And for those outsiders, as I like to call them, who are unaware, that's where leaning into the outcomes becomes so valuable and more relevant. And then the last step is deliver customer-focused value. So that's all about, don't just make the promise that you can provide social connection, actually deliver on it. So how do you optimize around your programming and the things that you're offering in the experience itself that actually helps them achieve that outcome, and not only achieve it, but achieve it in a way that makes them want to come back? I guess that's the 4 steps that I would really recommend arts organizations start to integrate into their strategy.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing this. And I actually have a question, because, again, talking with a lot of arts organization from different genres, it seems like when you're running an arts organization, your focus is obviously on the product. So on the show, on the big event and everything. And when these people are facing the need for a change, that can be traumatic. Perhaps they're aware that something needs to be done, but why is it so difficult to get started? Is it also your experience that there is a big frustration, resistance, and challenge? So even some people would like to change, but they don't dare, or maybe I feel like there is a big need of reassurance in the industry, saying, hey guys, changing is possible. It's a little bit, like David Taylor was saying, why are we not allowed to fail? And most importantly, when you're backed by data, the failure is brought down to a minor percentage because you already have analyzed what's happening. And this still seems to be hard. So what's your take on that? What's your experience?
Yeah, I absolutely think that there's a lot of resistance to change in the arts sector. It's scary, I would say, for arts leaders, because they don't have a lot of money to work with at this point, right? I mean, budgets are extremely tight. And if you try something and it doesn't work, that's going to be difficult. And I think for artists themselves, they know and love and breathe their art form. I think it's very hard to think outside of that box. I was there. I was in that opera world. And like I said earlier, I did not think about the audiences at all. That was the job of the arts administration, right? And I wasn't aware of how dire the situation really was. And so I would say, first of all, make sure that you're armed with data. So I have a slide deck. It's called Warning Signs. And it's a slide deck. It's a 50-page slide deck that walks you through these audience declines. I went through 40 years of surveys from the National Endowment for the Arts, and it shows you discipline by discipline what that decline looks like. And I think it's important to bring that to your team, to your CEO, to your board, and to your artists, and say, this is where our industry is, right? And this is where that tipping point is if we don't change, right? In 7 years, we may have lost another 50% of our audiences. You have to kind of create a shared sense of urgency to start with. I think that's really essential. And then there's good news, right? The good news is that, and here's a stat for you, companies that center the customer are 60% more profitable. That's what Deloitte has discovered by, all of these companies out in the for-profit world that have successfully centered the customer. That's huge, right? Why are we sleeping on that number? And there's another study from the Institute of Corporate Productivity. They have found the same thing to be true. Companies that consistently outperform their peers in revenue and profitability and customer satisfaction, the key driver of that success is a culture that deeply embeds customer centricity. So I think those 2 studies are huge for showing the potential. And I think that's a really great place to start. I also have this market analysis tool on my website, which is called Audience Unlocked, where you actually start to look at what are the actual numbers. If this particular percentage of consumers in my region are interested in well-being, and if we start marketing our art form as a vehicle for well-being, for that outcome, what's that look like in terms of numbers? How many more people can we bring in? And what does that look like in terms of revenue? So when you get really specific on what is the return on investment for change, I start to get really excited, because the potential is huge. And I think hopefully that is a step in the right direction for completely turning your boat around and going the other direction, right? Pivoting from product centric to customer centric.
I totally agree. I mean, obviously, when you have the full picture going back and understanding the numbers, that must make sense. But there is also another aspect, especially when working with arts organization. We know that normally there's not just one person that takes decisions. It's different departments. Sometimes
Yeah.
they don't even work together, which is incredible, right? Sometimes like, okay, so the development is on one side, the marketing is on the other side. Do you guys talk to each other? Or so maybe you get to talk and to show these aspects to a department or a person. But then again, the problem is, okay, now I need to talk with my management or to my board and so on and so forth. What is your experience?
You're right. It has to come from the top, I would say. It can't happen overnight, right? You have to sort of very slowly walk people through these new principles, familiarize the entire organization with the basic principles of customer centricity, and help them understand not only the benefits, but what it looks like to enact it. And I think what's incredible about this pivot is it really does bring an organization together around a common goal, right? Rather than, being focused on, okay, we need to bring in the best musicians and we need to spend as much money as we can to bring in the most well-known conductor, all of these things that actually most of your community doesn't really care about. Now you start to realize as an organization, we're focused on helping our consumer, helping the people in our community find the outcomes that they need to live fulfilled lives. It's incredible how that really kind of gels an organization together and gives them a North Star where you're not fighting so much about how much money you're going to spend on, the best soloists. You're talking about what are the best ways that we can help our community find these outcomes. And I think it's a whole new way of working together. And I think it's exciting.
It is absolutely exciting, but you can really tell it's a new thing here. It's a pioneer work,
Yeah.
and it's
Yes, it is.
new territory. Like, yeah, so, but this is actually is leading beautifully into the tools that are available out there. We can talk about the tools to engage the audience directly, but also the tools that are available to arts organization to fasten this process. And at Artelize, we have developed this dashboard, basically costing as a campaign on Facebook. What I mean is that technology can be very, very helpful in terms of saving resources because it's so affordable and effective. But again, the performing arts world is a bit behind adopting technology. So what is your experience with technology, first of all? And what do you think the role of technology, especially the new one powered by AI?
I am probably the biggest fan of bringing in new technologies whenever possible to make lives easier. I mean, arts leaders are so burnt out. They're so strapped for time and resources. So anytime you can bring in another tool to make their lives easier, I am, the biggest fan of all of that. I think when it comes to gathering customer insights and tracking that kind of data, technology is a huge part of that, right? Especially if you're doing it not just with, one-on-one listening sessions, but you're sending out, patron surveys after every concert. One of the things that I always advise arts organizations to do is gather data on how you're actually helping your patrons experience the outcomes that you're promising, right? So when they walk out of the concert hall, what percentage of them are willing to say, I feel 100% more happy, 100% more joyful, or whatever the outcome is that you're wanting to feature in your value proposition? Because that kind of data, gathering that data, tracking that data, not only helps with your marketing, but it also helps with development and fundraising, and finding partners that you wouldn't necessarily find if you were just focused on the product itself. So I'm a huge fan of doing that. I just sent an email to my subscribers this morning about using your voice in developing an online presence. And I think that's something that arts leaders, not all arts leaders, but there's many arts leaders who hesitate to do that, to develop an online presence on, places like LinkedIn. They often think, well, it's not my role, right? That's the job of the marketing team. We did not have this tool at our disposal 20 years ago, but when you create content as an individual, or you're sharing the content that your organization has created, it gets 560% more reach than just your branded posts that your marketing team is putting out there. I mean, that's the power of technology right there. There's also this number where, organizations that have engaged leadership that are really posting regularly online, they see a 202% higher performance with these posts than posts that are not connected to real people. And so I think, technology is such a powerful tool, and it's something that we didn't have, like I said, 20 years ago. And it's, absolutely leverage it whenever you can.
I would like to ask you this because all you say makes so much sense. And I get it because Artelize works with technology, but it's always surprising when we're talking to arts leaders to see that they get it, but there is this hesitancy. And it reminds me a little bit, just to mention opera singers, how it used to be like, you need to have an agent before you do anything. Like, you cannot do anything. But the moment you get an agent, you expect everything coming from your agent, as opposed to taking care of your product, knowing exactly what is it that you're selling, and then collaborating together with an agent in order to really make the business. I get this tendency of resistance and perhaps waiting for something or somebody else to be able to unblock that. I don't know if that's the same experience you had.
I think, yeah, maybe there is. Do you think there's an inherent distrust of technology in the arts because it's sort of the antithesis of creativity? I don't know. I'm not quite sure what it is, but
It can be misused, but it can also be very supportive of creativity. Don't you agree?
yeah. Yeah. What was that? Wasn't there an orchestra recently that had a robot play the cello? Did you see that in the news recently? So
Um,
maybe,
I think it was in Norway. Could that be? I think it
I
was
think that's right.
Norwegian. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the kind of technology I do not
Yeah.
recommend.
Too much for me as well. I agree. I agree. But I mean, really, when you can use it to do the heavy lifting for the boring stuff, maybe it's because people feel like, oh no, I need to learn something new.
I mean, from all the arts leaders I've spoken with, I think that so many of them are burnt out and exhausted and strapped for time and strapped for resources and money, and just, yeah, like you said, like learning something new and even paying for something new just feels like a too big of a leap. And so we've got to sort of find a way to relieve some of that stress that really was compounded by the pandemic, I think.
As you were saying in the beginning, to help them, because we know how stressful that industry is. No doubt about that, especially when you have this sharp deadlines and all the problems revolving around a season, anything that can happen. Probably that is very human, right? Who doesn't go through that? It was amazing to dive into these topics with you. I love your perspective. It's so refreshing. And I must say, I'm very proud because I know opera singers are so intelligent. No, I'm joking. But yes, I think this is also how the art gives you that depth and that power of empathizing with what you're getting in touch with, and you found this vocation to be at the service of helping, even on a bigger scale, the place where you first started as an artist. I believe that is absolutely fascinating and really, really beautiful. So what I would like to ask you, actually, I have two things. The first thing is to leave us with an encouragement for the industry, so to transmit a message of hope, and yeah, we can make it, we can get that audience come back, we can build a bigger audience, we can take it from there. And then just a personal thing is do you still sing sometimes?
Gosh, I'll answer that one first. So I'm a working mom. I've got this side hustle, and I think probably the most that I sing is now in the car to and from school with my 9-year-old son, right? We turn on the tunes and we sing along, and that's the extent of it. But I do hope to get back into it. Probably not full blown opera at this point. It's been too long, but I definitely miss it, and I try to do it whenever I can. So that would be my answer to that second question. And I think it's so true. You mentioned empathy, and I think really customer centricity comes down to empathy. That is really sort of the fundamental in here. And I talk about how when you're on stage as an opera singer, if you are performing, and you're using gestures and movements that have no meaning behind them, that aren't connected to true emotion, the audience can see right through it. right? They know you haven't done your work. They know you don't understand the character. They know you don't know what you're singing about. And I think the same holds true for arts organizations when it comes to marketing and branding. Your gestures, in your branding and your messaging don't mean something or aren't connected to something that means something for the customer, they will see right through it and they will not care about what you're doing. And so there's that thread again, right, from the opera world. But I would just encourage arts organizations to really look into what would be the return on investment if we made this pivot, right? How many people in our community are prioritizing outcomes like social connection and well-being, and what would that look like in terms of additional revenue? And you may be surprised at how many thousands of patrons are out there that would be interested in your product if you market it as a vehicle for an outcome that they're seeking, right? Thousands of patrons, hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional revenue, in some places, probably millions of dollars in additional revenue. So don't let the fear of something new deter you from really diving in and exploring this, because it really, I think, is the wave of the future for viability in the arts sector.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I totally support this. And I really hope that people get inspired by your beautiful story, your beautiful journey, your empathy, your expertise, and how sweet is the way you relate to the problems that are out there, like problems that we all have in some form or another. So it's absolutely normal to have them, but it is also possible to overcome them, getting some knowledge about where we are, getting some context of where we come from, where the challenges before and why they're still here if they are, and what we can do. I mean, it's really good news. We can do something about that, and it doesn't need an overnight change. It can start right away and small steps. And I think there is also a bigger community where range professional of art, performing arts can exchange experiences and journey and perhaps find some, support. It's always
Solidarity,
right?
camaraderie.
Exactly,
Yeah,
camaraderie, right? I mean, it's
definitely.
always, as opera singers, again, it's nice to have some friends on stage when you're performing. So
That's right.
it's very human. So, Ruth, I would like to give our listeners a little bit of reference about where they can find you or know more a bit more about your work. I know you're very active on LinkedIn, and
My Yep, LinkedIn is my favorite place. I post there pretty regularly. That's where I put all my hot takes. But yeah, there's a lot of free and also paid tools and resources on my website to help organizations shift to this new way of thinking. And I would also recommend that you get on my list, because when you're on my mailing list, there's a lot of exclusive deals and tools and offers that come through that. That's sort of where the magic happens.
And from my part, if I can endorse, Ruth page on LinkedIn, I love what she posts, and we were just talking about that off camera. I really encourage everyone to check that post about the product and how sometimes we really think we nailed it, and we're super proud and all into the product, except that this is exactly not the center of the world for our customers. Yes, a shift of perspective that sometimes probably is wise to explore to better understand what surrounds us. But Ruth, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your insights. I hope we're gonna have you again on the Artelize podcast. Probably next year. It's gonna be super exciting. There are so many things happening. What are you up next?
Next, well, it's Thanksgiving week here in the States. So that's all I'm thinking about. I need to make 4 pies by Thursday. So that's where I'm at. And after that, who knows?
Send you opera singer support in the kitchen then. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you very much.
This was so much fun. Really, thank you so much for inviting me.